Let us know if it doesn't work. We'll
Okay.
try to get you in. All right, so Chrissy asked me to talk about music and music education. So I've been doing music for a while. I started teaching about 25 years ago, I guess. I was a band director for a while, and then now I teach at JSU in the music department. And so we're going to talk a little about, is music important? What place does it have in education? Is there a place for it? Is it, why music? Is it something we can fit in if we have time, or what's the reasoning behind it? And so we're going to do the top 10 list of why I think music is something we should focus on in some form. Not everybody's going to be doing the same thing, but I think it's an important thing. How many of y'all were in band or choir or orchestra so everybody?
Except me.
Except my wife. So what were y'all in? Band? Choir?
Choir.
Choir? Band?
Band.
Choir. Band.
Okay. What'd y'all play?
Clarinet.
Yeah, that's what I teach at JSU. All right.
Saxophone.
Saxophone. Trombone.
Radio.
Yes.
VHS. What is that? What was this?
Did you hear?
8-track
I
tapes.
don't know if you keep up with
No,
trombone
not
stuff.
that.
Bill Watrous is one of the world's
The little
best
cassette tapes.
trombonists.
Cassette
He
tapes.
just died
Cassette
last
tape.
week.
Yeah.
He's amazing. I heard him live once in South Carolina.
I still got some. I'm just holding on to it.
All right, so this is a color wheel. This is, you may have heard of this, Gardner's intelligence wheels. He says there's, some lists have 7, some lists have 10, but he started with 7, then he went to 8 quickly. Anyway, there's 8 here, and these are intelligences. And some people, I think, our kids, I think I can see this, they have different intelligences, and they would lie on different places in here. And that's okay. Not everybody has to be where we are, and we think everybody who doesn't have what I have, my kind of intelligence, they're not as, everybody's got a different, it's not just one, but there's different ones on here. So there's word smart, there's logic smart, nature smart, picture smart, body smart, music smart, people smart, and self smart. So there's different intelligences, and you might have a combination. I think for me, I'm probably the music one, obviously, and the mathematical. And a lot of musicians go into that. They're not really some musicians are the artsy types, and then the others of us are the logical. We see music as math, and that's how we approach it. There seems to be a lot of musicians like that. But that kind of plays into what we're doing here, and we got to figure out music, even if you don't have that per se, I think music can play into all these others and help us, as we're going to see here.
Close encounters.
So we're going to start with the obvious ones. What do you think of when you think of musicians, and what does it bring to the table? Why would we study music? I think the first one is discipline. When I started lessons, we started band when I was in like 4th grade, and I started lessons when I was in 6th grade. I remember the first lesson, my teacher said, if you don't practice 60 minutes a day, 7 days a week, every single day, don't even come back and bother me. I don't want to see you again. Don't even do it. And I was like, okay, so I started doing it, but then I realized, wow, after a month of that, I was way better, and I could tell. He was like, you see what's happening? And I'm like, yes, I kind of do. I see the difference. And so a lot of musicians find out you got to go. Whether you feel like it or not, you go pick out your clarinet or your saxophone or your trombone, and you go sit in the practice room and you practice your scales and your stuff. And discipline. They get that individually and practice. They get it in band. They get it in rehearsals, marching band, all that stuff. They tend to be a big focus on just discipline. Number 2, out of the top 10, teamwork. I don't know of anything else I do in my life have ever done that requires that much teamwork. And everybody's trying to figure out what everybody else is doing at the same moment. And everybody's just locked in and trying to figure out whether I'm in a band or an orchestra, and it's just a really cool feeling. I played sports and did that, and that was part of this, obviously, but to the degree, I think I haven't experienced that in any other facet like I have in musical ensembles. And it's just an interesting phenomenon of doing that. I don't know if you've been in good groups, and it's an interesting thing. And it provides that teamwork, and it's a social thing too. I mean, you got to figure out how to work with people. You know, you're not always right, and you got to kind of go with other people sometimes. Sometimes they have the lead in the melody, and you realize you're not always important, and you got to work with other people, and they have what's important. And your director tells you to shut up. Trombones don't have the melody, the trumpets do. And you're like, okay. You know. All right, number 3, self-confidence. Not everybody's the greatest player in the world. Not everybody's the greatest football player in the world. But doing music and, you know, and sports and stuff sometimes has that component of, I have accomplished something. I did this. I learned how to do it. Nobody can take credit. I have put the time in and discipline, and I've done this. And I know it did it for me. I can remember in beginning band, I could only play quarter notes and go tell Aunt Rhody. But I quickly realized, you know, I'm going to play it better than the person next to me. I'm going to play Go Tell Aunt Rhody faster than you can. Here we go. And then, you know, and then I was like sitting up straighter, and that was my thing. And that can really build somebody's confidence. And it can do it in a lot of different ways, whether it's just learning to be accomplished at what you do, and people recognizing that around you and going, hey, good job. And, you know, and then they're trying to get better than you, and it's competition. And, but I think it can be huge in that. I've seen that in other people too, and how that can, all of a sudden, they sit up straighter and, you know, take a little more pride in everything they're doing. When I was in high school, even, I mean, younger and up through high school, I was extremely shy, painfully shy. You know, I did clarinet, I did soccer, and those were my things, but I was painfully shy. And I remember my band director, he called me at home, scared me to death, when I was a junior in high school, and said, come to my office. So I went to the office, and he goes, you're going to try out for drum major. It's like in 2 weeks. I'm like, no, all my friends are trying out. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing this. He goes, no, you're trying out. I'm like, no, I'm not. I can't even imagine being in front of everybody. There's no way. Leave me alone. And he's like, no, you're going to try out, basically. So I tried out, and all my friends were mad at me because I said I wasn't. Then I got it, and I had to somehow, over the next few months, figure out how to stand in front of people and yell and give commands and run rehearsal and do stuff. And I told him years later, we did a band reunion, and I was like 30 at the time or something. And I had to give him an award or something on stage, and I said, in front of the audience, I was like, you did something for me that nobody else did. You forced me into doing that. And that was the best thing anybody ever did for me. I don't know what I would be doing now if you hadn't done that. So again, that self-confidence, I don't care if you're a music smart person, you can get a lot of that self-confidence out of that. Okay, what are we up to? Number 4, maybe? Coordination. Obviously, in music, you're doing several things at one time. I mean, it's the rubbing your tummy, patting your head thing times 10. I mean, if you've played. And then if you add in marching band to that, and you're having to march and do all that stuff at the same time and coordinate, it's massive coordination. You got your fingers going, you got your embouchure going, your air support going, your diaphragm's pushing the air at the right speed for the right dynamic, and you're doing articulation with your tongue, and your legs are moving, and your ears are working, trying to connect things and listen to what's going on and what you're doing and they're doing. It's a massive exercise in coordination. And a lot of people think they'll never get it at first, and it's really awkward at times, and whether you're in beginning band or you're just starting to do marching band, or or you're playing piano, and I'm horrible at piano, trying to coordinate my two hands together, and I don't know how people play piano like that. I'm terrible. Do you all play piano? Well, I'm horrible. I have to teach a class that uses piano, and I just constantly apologize to the students. I'm terrible. So here's some of the kind of a diagram. You've got different things going on in your brain about what you're doing when you're playing. It's a brain workout. You've got the premotor cortex. Whoops, I slipped off of it. You have the premotor cortex, the frontal cortex, the dorsal premotor cortex, the motor cortex, the superior temporal auditory cortex. You've got a lot of things going on that you have to coordinate. And you're supposed to be tapping your foot while you do this in beginner band and keeping the beat and subdividing the beat and playing with somebody else while you're doing all this coordination. And it's an interesting thing. And you think, after we get older and we practice something for a while, whether it's saxophone or something, and we're thinking, oh, it's, just do this, it's easy. And then you try to pick up something new. If I asked you right now, just put your pen in your other hand right now and take notes, you couldn't make it look halfway legible, I bet. If you've ever broken your arm and had to write with your other hand, you're like, I know how this is supposed to go, I just can't make myself do it. I don't have that fine motor skills, I haven't done this. Okay. Craftsmanship. These get more and more interesting as we go a little bit here. In some ways, I think music teaches us, better than a lot of other things, craftsmanship. How do I take what I'm doing and make it better? Anybody can play notes on a page. But how do I make it interesting? How do I make this a better product? How do I take what I'm doing, which is okay, but make it better and do something with it? And I think that kind of mindset then applies to everything else I do. If I can get into that mode of thinking of, let's make this a better product, not just an okay product. And music, I think, does that. We're always trying to make it better and more interesting. And, I know that's what I'm getting my students to do at the university is, okay, you play the right notes, but when they always come in and just play, they'll play it without any feeling and just play something, and I try to get them to play it and make something of it. Just playing the notes doesn't make it music. So I frequently just go over to the bookshelf and pull off a book, and I start reading like this with no emotion and just go through the words. And I do that for a couple minutes, and they're just looking at me like, stop. And then I say, okay, well, try it again. And they do the same thing. So I pick the book up again and start reading. And they're like, what are you doing? I was like, well, how do I know? I'm reading what's there. It's right, isn't it? And they're like, well, yeah, but that's not right. I'm like, why? I did every word. And they're like, well, you didn't make it sound right. I'm like, I did everything it says. So we have to talk about, how do you decide which word to accent? How do you decide where to make your point, or speed it up, or slow it down and stretch? Or how do you decide how to do all that stuff? Like, I don't know. It's like you got to think about this stuff, don't you? And figure out what's going to be interesting. And they start getting the idea of, I got to start analyzing this stuff and figuring out how to really fit it together and make it interesting. But then I think that applies, whether you then go into, these guys want to go into being a carpenter someday. I think that craftsmanship will apply to that if they learn that skill, or to whatever they're doing, how to make a quality product, not just a whatever, I slap something down. Memorization. Music greatly exercises our memory. There's so many things you have to do in music. We've got to do all our musical terms, which happen to be in Italian 99% of the time, and if they're not, they're in French or German. You got to memorize all that stuff. You got to memorize all your fingerings for your instrument. You got to memorize your scales, all your major scales, maybe your minor scales. You got to memorize the music theory and why stuff works the way it does, and the sharps and the flats and the chords and the key signatures. And then you got to figure out all this memorization of music in general, how things work. There's lots of stuff going on. So the more we exercise our memory, the easier it gets. If we don't exercise that part of our brain, it gets harder. Then some musicians have to do this more than others. If you're a piano player, you memorize everything you're going to do, and you perform that way. Others of us don't have to do it as much, but it's I think music brings that out. And then you realize it's not as bad as I thought. I had to memorize pieces before that were pages long, and I thought, there's no way. And then you start practicing, and you're like, it's not so bad. I can do this. Speaking of memorization, this is a cool side fact. The autonomous sensory meridian response. That is, have you ever heard a great piece of music and you're just like, and you have that tingle go down your head and back and you're just like, wow. That's the autonomous sensory meridian response to music. That is not affected when we think of dementia and Alzheimer's. That is not affected by Alzheimer's. You don't lose that. And have you ever, there's several videos online. If you go to YouTube tonight, go look up Alzheimer's and music. And there's several of them out there. One of the most famous ones is a gentleman named Henry. And there's several videos that follow the same format. Basically, there's an unresponsive Alzheimer's patient who's just non-communicative and just is there. But then they start bringing they play music for him that they knew from a child, and they light up and they start vocalizing and talking, or they'll sing with it. They haven't spoken in ages, and they'll start doing the words. There's other YouTube videos there's one of a lady that I'm thinking of, and she's the same way, and they start kind of prompting her with music from her childhood or hymns, and then she just starts singing and going for hours, singing hymns.
Amazing.
Those music memories don't go away, and sometimes that temporarily brings them out of that, and it goes to a certain part of the brain that starts functioning, and they can bring that back.
That's cool.
Creative thinking. So this goes back to that. It's kind of what we were talking about a minute ago, but creative thinking in music. How do you do things differently? So sometimes with my students, I'll talk about, how do you make this music interesting, and we have to decide what makes it the most interesting. So I think of like a sentence: the dog ran up the mountain. You understand me? You're not really enthused by how I said that, but you understand me. Or I can say, the dog ran up the mountain. And that puts a different twist on it. Or I can say, the dog ran up the mountain. Or I can say, the dog ran up the mountain. All these have a different twist. And for the context that we're in, we got to figure out what's the most interesting. The dog ran up the mountain. The dog ran up the mountain. The dog ran up the mountain. So all of these, it's kind of like how we figure out music phrasing.
Meaning.
Right. What makes sense? But the answer almost never is the dog ran up the mountain, right? You got to figure out what context, what are you trying to say? And it's the same with music. There may be several notes, but usually there's something in there that you're trying to bring out, and we're trying to get the students to figure that out and use that creative thinking and figure out how to. If you play every single note the same way with the same emphasis, you're almost always pretty bored. You have to emphasize this and not emphasize that. Plus, besides that, they have to figure out phrasing. How do you take a music phrase, which is a musical sentence of notes? How do you phrase that? Just like when we talk, we always do a lilt up and a lilt down on sentences typically. And how we choose to do that has different impact on how we choose that. Music, same way. Or the tone that we use, to say, the words you say are like 10% of meaning, and your tone and body language are 90%. It's the same in music. Dynamics, how loud or soft you're doing stuff. Rubato is the speed you're playing music. You can do a little faster here and then stretch and then keep going kind of thing. Same with how you speak. If you vary that, you're more interesting, and if you do that effectively. Balance with other people. I'm playing with different people, usually in ensembles. How do you keep adjusting that like a big equalizer, constantly moving it up and down and figuring out who brings out what? Style, what style do I do it in? Do I use vibrato, kind of vibrating the tone? Improvisation, jazz players, or, we think of jazz, but all the great players in history, the Mozarts, the Bachs, they all said history says they all sat down and could just improvise on the spot and do all kinds of amazing things. Language. Now this is interesting as we're within education. Music has a great impact on language. This is from the Stanford Journal from 2015. Musical experience improves the way people's brains process split-second changes in sounds and tones used in speech, and consequently may affect the acoustic and phonetic skills needed for learning language and reading. There was also a study in China that came out just recently, said the same thing, and they took little kids. It was like 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and they had some music training for just a short amount. It was like 12 weeks, and they were way better. And if you don't know Chinese is very tonal language. How you say things tonally makes a big difference. They were way better at deciphering language and learning than the kids who didn't. So, and this applies. There was another study recently in Norway, Sweden, one of those maybe, and it said the same thing. Those who study music are way better at picking up those tonal differences and learning language, learning to read. They all have advantages. There's also studies that say dyslexia is helped by music study.
What kind of study?
Any kind of music study.
You said 12 weeks was fine.
Well, that was the Chinese study. Said I think it was just a short term. But there's others that say they have long-term studies and professional musicians, and there's all kinds of studies related to language. It has a big impact on how people progress, learning to speak at a young age, learning to decipher other people's speech and what they mean and the tonal inflections that people use, and even their reading skills. So that's interesting. That's not just their auditory skills that are fine-tuned, but learning how to read is improved. And I don't know if that's partially because with music you're reading a foreign language on the page of music with all the notes and staff and everything you're having to do. And it's part of that because they're having to read and use their eyes and decipher things just like another language, even though it's a symbolic language on the page. Maybe that helps with their dyslexia. It's just exercising that a little bit. I'm not sure.
Can you get us a link to those two studies?
Yeah. So brain development. Brain development, there's actual structural changes, not just, hey, we think they're better at something. There are structural changes in the brain that occur after only 15 months of study of music. The structural changes are typically in the motor and auditory skills area of the brain.
Structural changes in the brain occur after 15 months of study. Charlotte Mason says that once an action happens, the old brain cells start sloughing away, falling away, dying off, for new ones to be created. So it's interesting if there's actually a time from where those first actions, because it's once you start the process outside of your habit, you immediately create that new channel, that new direction. So it's funny how it says 15 months.
What qualifies as study?
Keep going. I was just thinking out
I'm
loud.
assuming they're learning an instrument or learning or choral.
When I was real little, I heard singing in church, and we'd do that all the time.
I guess that would.
But then I didn't start anything formal till I was in elementary school with a recorder, and then after that there was nothing until I started playing piano.
I mean, that's to a certain extent. Our first experiences probably laid the pathway to make it easier for when you started band. If you hadn't had that, then you would have had to start all those listening skills from scratch, and you'd had a much harder time.
I wonder if some of that depends on what type of music too. Were you singing like parts in church, then probably so.
And the
As
motor
opposed
skills
to
here,
just
if
singing,
you're doing
you know, the same
instrument,
melody everybody's
I'm sure the instrument helps the motor skills much more than if you're in choir. But these are interesting. So the hippocampus is involved with memory and learning in our brains. And it relies on neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons. And studies say that music education may increase neurogenesis and be linked to improved learning and memory. There are hundreds of these studies out there. You can obviously Google and find a lot of this stuff, but there's all these studies that show the links between music education and brain development. It's really interesting stuff. And there's several of my students have gone on, and they're now in different places, Colorado and Georgia and different places, and they're studying music therapy. And it's not just, hey, let's play you some music because everybody likes music, and hey, that's nice, so don't you feel better? It's actual study and research behind this stuff, like we're talking about the Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and there's research behind it, how music affects people and in real ways, whether it's pain, there's studies on pain reduction, and how it can have major impacts on people. So anyway, there's all this brain-music connection.
I can definitely relate to that when I listen to Christmas music every single day. But the reason that I started that, and it's the old stuff that I grew up listening to. I don't care about none of the new stuff. I want to hear the old stuff. But I had 2 major deaths in my family within 6 weeks. And I was struggling really hard to pull myself together and get out of that sadness. And one day I was just laying in the bed and I was just praying, God, what can I do that can help pull me out of this? There's stuff in this house that I need to get done.
Right.
And all of a sudden it just came to me. I was like, what makes me joyful? What makes me happy? And that was Christmas music, because it's the music that reminds me of good times. And it reminded me of the memories instead of the sicknesses that I had just been through with them. And even to this day, it used to be anytime I was sad, I would listen to Christmas music. But when I'm at home, and a lot of times now even in the car, if Braxton's not with us, Richie will join in. But it gives me peace, and it gives me joy. And to hear the older people like Burl Ives, and those are the people that I love, Rosemary Clooney, all of that, it just gives me just that feeling of happiness and joy. And I'm sorry, but when I'm cleaning my house, I'm not so happy and joyful. But if I've got my Christmas music going, I'm happy and I'm joyful.
That leads us into the next one we're going to get to in a second. That's perfect, though.
I can definitely see where the music therapy, because would definitely help, especially in older people.
Watch some of those.
Of just not even
you start watching those
Alzheimer's.
YouTube videos that we were talking about a minute ago with the dementia and Alzheimer's patients.
But not even with them.
How people, just anybody lights up with, you bring back in that memory. It's like they say smell is one of the top instigators of memory. But music is also, just brings back, and people just light up when a certain song, and
Even jingles.
that takes you
sometimes,
right
Yes.
back
Like
to.
jingles from your childhood.
Yes.
You remember like.
Yeah, sometimes I'll
like,
say,
the
I
whole
was
Cyrus
13 years
commercial.
old and I was there. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's like a smell. It just takes me right, see where I was. And that's that song.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
A song will come on and he'll be like, 1987, January, all of a sudden, I'm like, how the heck do you know all that?
I'll do that sometimes, and my husband will go, okay, next song, tell me, what year.
He's all over it.
Like, name that tune. Y'all don't remember that show, do you?
Yeah.
Name that
Which
tune?
one?
Okay, name that tune.
Oh, yeah.
I can name that in one note.
I could do it on Christmas songs. And that's been like 10 years that I've literally not listened to it every day, but probably the last 3.
Yeah.
And usually right after Christmas, I try to give it a break, just for at least a month or 2, just to, and then I'd listen to jazz or something. But usually on Sunday morning, we're getting dressed, we're listening to Christmas music. And right after Christmas, I stopped it, and Richie goes, I miss the Christmas music. But
My kids make fun of me at school because I'm going down the hall, I whistle all the time. I'll be walking down the hallway and I'll be whistling a Christmas tune all the time. I'm like, Mr. Brandon, why are you? It's May. Why are you listening to a Christmas tune? I'm like, I can't get out of my head. I was a band director. And when you prepare for that Christmas concert every year,
yes.
it's like 6-7 periods a day. Every period you're doing Christmas music. And that's for like 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks or something, every single year. You don't just do it once, you do every year. So, all day long, Christmas music, all day long, next year, every single day, for hours and hours. So it is ingrained in my head, Christmas music.
It's a lovely thing, isn't
I can't get it out, yes. It's always there. All right.
I love it.
He just got it quiet. Now you started it back up.
Sorry.
One of the only activities that activates, stimulates, and uses the entire brain is music. You can look up and all these different brain scans. But it's one of the few activities you'll see people reading or people typing or people playing a game or doing a video game or they're doing something else and their different parts are just lighting up. Great. Then you see somebody playing music and it's like everything's going. Every part of your brain because you're just doing so many things. And I don't have to read all that to you, but you're using all these different portions of your brain when you're playing music. It's such a stimulating thing. In fact, Sabrina drinks coffee. I don't drink coffee. If I don't practice and play my instrument, I'm a clarinetist. If I don't practice, I feel like I've never had my coffee for the day. I can go through the whole day and think, I'm 90%. I'm pretty good. And then I practice. And it is like I had a espresso or something. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm ready for whatever. I can do anything right now. And it's like my whole brain just like, okay, now we're fully on. And I can feel that difference. So I typically, when I go to work, I practice in the mornings. I have that luxury of getting there and just doing my thing, and I practice. And that just like, wow, there's my coffee. I'm good. Mm-hmm. And I can start doing my work. But it's amazing what it does for me. There's one of those brain scans. And actually, there's a lot of scans that show typical things because of what we were talking about earlier with the music. Helps create different parts of your brain and helps you do certain things better. That some people's scans will be lighting up because they're working so hard at something in a certain area. And then you see a musician and they're like, this is easy. I've created all those neurons that need for this function, and I don't have to work so hard at reading or whatever, and it's easier for you.
That's interesting.
So it kind of goes in that direction too.
Yeah.
These are the synapses, and this shows that, synapses are the chemical connections between the neurons that form circuits in our brains. So they're the chemical connections between the neurons. And the data suggests that musicians have increased numbers of synapses in the part of their brains that control motor functions. I don't know this isn't a study, but I took the best class I ever took in my life was typing. Just because I have to use it all the time. And I took typing in 8th grade. And it was the old, ching, ching. It's the old school. They were ancient. And at the last week of class, she brings out the electronic version and goes, we're like, why are you behind these? We were learning how to change ribbons and do the old school. Anyway, that class came real easy to me, and I got to be pretty proficient. But looking back, I bet it's because I had been studying music for years before that, and the motor skills kind of were already laid for the dexterity, and so maybe it came a little easier for me because of that prior training. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was the best class I ever took in my life.
Wow.
I think in this study, it was the one they studied professional musicians who had been playing for years versus non, and there was a big difference.
What do you think that gap is for age-wise? How do you think the synapses changes with your ability to create neurons changing with age? Where children could change quickly, how does older people who said, hey, I need to work on mental exercise. If I pick it up today, obviously I'm going to be better in 12 weeks, but what's that?
I don't know.
Kind of like working out, it slows down
I
with
do,
age.
and I think it makes a difference if I play stuff, as I get older and older. I think it makes a difference if I play stuff I already know. And it's just in there, and it's just like, whatever. I've done this a million times. I can do that scale. I can do this piece of music. I've done it. I don't have to think about it. But now give me a new piece of music where I have to learn all kinds of different patterns and different ways of doing things.
Stretch.
That really is like a new exercise. Some people go to the gym every day, but then you throw a new exercise, and they can't do that at all, even though they're buff. And, but that's a different muscle group, and they haven't been using that. I think music can do that because you're always changing what you're learning, and it's like those mental. People play mental games on their phone to keep them, going. I think music does that in a huge way.
I do think children learn easier though. Because I tried to learn piano as an adult. And it was just hard. But I've seen kids just pick it. And same with language. Like when I was overseas, the kids learned Spanish and they only had a 30-minute lesson a day. They just picked it up from walking around town. Their parents were in class 6 hours a day. And within a month, their 5-year-old was translating for them because they picked it up so fast. So I do think it matters if you start early. I mean,
Sure.
Yep.
I think there's an advantage there. Anyway,
The College Entrance Examination Board found that students involved in public school music programs scored 107 points higher on the SAT than students with no participation. U.S. students in instrumental music over the middle and high school years show significantly higher levels of mathematics proficiency by grade 12. And secondary students who participated in band or orchestra reported the lowest lifetime and current use of all substances, alcohol, tobacco, illicit drugs.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there's in fact, I used to
We just always thought the nerds took band.
see that's what some people would say. The nerds took band, we're just the nerds, so we were in band. But they're showing that may be some of the case, but it does train our brains differently to help us get better at things. It's not just that's where the nerds go or something. I do orientation stuff at JSU, and we talk with the parents, and the parents are like, oh, I don't know if my kid should go into music ed, what are they going to do with music? And we say, they don't have to stay in music. They can go to anything, get an undergrad in this, and they're sought after. There are people out there, headhunters, who look for the musicians because they know they have the teamwork background, they have all the discipline to practice, they can sit down and be by themselves and just do the work, and we'll train them to do the skill. Most of us in our jobs, we learned what we needed to know when we got there. Our degree didn't really give us what we needed. I know mine didn't. In fact, the medical school acceptance rates, their music is one of the highest accepted majors into medical school. In fact, there were a few years that it was on the top.
Wow.
Over the biology students, you go to college and you get your pre-med degree in biology and whatever. That wasn't the top acceptance rate into medical school.
Yeah, I just cross-posted 2 articles. I think it was to our Facebook group. Steve Jobs did an interview that said that for Google. No, not Google. Apple. And then Mark Zuckerberg said for Facebook that the arts background was better than the technical
Yep.
career fields. That they wanted somebody that had the teamwork, the discipline, and all of that team player to go along with. Now we'll train you to do what we want you to do.
I read yesterday the majority of people in Silicon Valley have music backgrounds.
Wow.
And many of them are current musicians at some level.
just to stay up.
Yep. So, don't know if that's true, but I read it. Early music training dramatically enhances children's abstract reasoning skills. The findings indicate that music uniquely enhances higher brain functions required for mathematics, chess, science, engineering. A 2-year Swiss study involving 1,200 children showed that students involved in the music program were better at languages, learned to read more easily, showed an improved social climate, showed more enjoyment in school, and had a lower level of stress than non-music students. From the time I started band in 4th grade through all of school, through college, all I think of when you think of any time period of my life was what I was doing in music. I don't know anything about any of my other teachers, classes. I don't even remember that stuff. It was just the music stuff that made it interesting. The other stuff was just boring, something I had to do to wait till doing the music stuff. That's when my brain turned on in that class. This goes back to what you were saying. I think the number one reason is because it helps us to appreciate beauty. You know, if all we're listening to is what's on the pop music or the hip hop music station, I don't know that trains us to appreciate all the beauty that's out there in music. And music's part of every culture, everywhere. It's not just something fun. I think it's part of being human. The Bible has it throughout of how music is used to worship God. And I think this is part of us. And if you're in something, if you're in choir, band, orchestra, whatever, playing piano, you're learning about better music, quality music, and stuff that enhances our lives. And you learn about, not just Bieber, but you might learn about Mozart or Wagner or Beethoven or Bach or somebody. There's all kinds of great music out there. So I have fun just, scanning through, and learning about new music. Like, I haven't heard this person before. Oh, that's really neat. That's beautiful stuff. And there's good and bad in everything. So, I don't think we need to tell kids, this is what you must love. You need to love Hindemith. You need to love Wagner. They might go, I hate that. But then you might play them, a Beethoven symphony, and they think, oh, it's cool. So I think that's the number one, because it makes us more human. Appreciating beauty, and there's so much great music out there. So those are my top 10. Do y'all have any questions?
I think we covered them as we've come across them.
Okay.